The rain over San Lazaro Bay was not a cleansing rain. It was a cold, oily drizzle that slicked the concrete piers and turned the air thick with the smell of diesel and salt. From the elevated watchtower, Reina Ortiz, 29 years old and running on fumes, watched the harbor lights blur into the black water. It was late, well past midnight, and every minute of her shift as a port rescuer dragged. Her real focus was miles away in Echo Heights, where her 6-year-old daughter, Zoe, was breathing through the night with a shallow, barking cough. Mrs. Chen, their landlady and savior, was with her, but the anxiety coiled tight in Reina's gut. Zoe's asthma was mild. The doctors said manageable, but manageable required medication, and the clinic's assistance program was a mountain of paperwork she had yet to conquer. The sudden clang of the emergency bell cut through the night like a blade. It was not a drill. Red lights flashed across the wet console. A business jet, inbound to the private strip across the channel, had clipped a loading crane in the fog and gone down. It was in the main channel, sinking fast, the incoming tide threatening to smash it against the barnacled pilings of Pier 4. Reina did not hesitate. She was in her gear and sprinting down the gangway before the second alarm finished its cycle. The water was a shock of absolute cold, blacker than the sky. She kicked hard, her light cutting through the murk, fighting the treacherous pull of mooring lines left slack by a careless freighter. The jet's fuselage was a pale ghost below the surface, its wing already crumpled against the concrete. The cabin door was jammed, half submerged. She used the pry bar from her belt, forcing the hinge with a groan of stressed metal. Inside, the emergency lights flickered, illuminating a nightmare of floating briefcases and churning water. Only one man was strapped into a passenger seat, his head slumped forward, unconscious. She sliced through the seat belt with her harness knife. He was heavy, solid muscle and expensive suit, dead weight in the flooding compartment. She got her arms under his, hooking her grip, and began the agonizing pull backward. She knew his face from the news, from the glossy magazine covers at the checkout stand. Cassian Calaveri, 32 years old, the heir to Blackshore Holdings, the shadowy conglomerate run by his father, Don Nero Calaveri. Blackshore owned half this port, and rumors said they owned the other half in ways that never saw sunlight. A new smell, sharp and chemical, flooded the cabin. Jet fuel. It slicked the water. Iridescent and deadly. Up on the pier, a damaged transformer, soaked by the crash spray, spat a vicious blue spark. There was no time. The fuel met the water's surface, spreading. "No, you don't," Reina hissed, pure adrenaline surging. She saw the rescue ladder hanging from the deck of the first response boat that had just arrived. Grabbing an emergency insulating blanket from a bulkhead pouch, she threw it over the man's shoulders and her own, a flimsy shield against the inevitable. She hooked him to her harness, screamed "haul" at the crew above, and wrapped her body around his as they were dragged up the rope ladder. They cleared the rail by inches when the world turned white and hot. The explosion was small but violent, a concussive whump that rattled her teeth and sent a plume of fire into the rainy night. She collapsed onto the deck, rolling Cassian off her, ripping the blanket away. He was alive. He erupted in a series of deep, racking coughs, spewing seawater and bile onto the deck. His eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a billionaire playboy. They were steel gray, utterly cold and stripped bare with confusion and primal fear. His hand shot out, fastening around her wrist in a grip of crushing strength, a reflexive act of survival, anchoring himself to the one solid thing in his drowning world. Reina did not flinch. She placed her free hand firmly on his shoulder. "You're out of the water," she said, her voice low and steady, the tone she used to calm frightened boaters, the tone she used on Zoe during a bad night. "You're on the deck. You're safe." His grip loosened, but did not release. He stared at her, the confusion hardening into a sharp, assessing intelligence. Sirens wailed, closing in. The port police arrived first, followed by the monolithic presence of the MOTB, the Metropolitan Organized Threat Bureau. Agents in dark windbreakers began securing the scene, their faces grim. but another group arrived almost impossibly fast, appearing from the landward side of the pier in dark, identical suits, Black Shore's private security. They moved with a chilling, quiet efficiency, creating a sterile bubble around Cassian, ignoring the MOTB agents. Raina stood back, dripping and cold, giving her statement to an MOTB agent. From the corner of her eye, she saw one of the Black Shore aides, a man with a face like carved stone, bend near the wreckage line. He palmed something, a small, hardened case, the portable black box, the E-slate. He slipped it into his jacket pocket with a furtive glance. Raina's blood ran colder than the seawater. She turned her back, pulling her phone from its waterproof pouch, angling it low. She pretended to check her messages, zooming in just enough. The click of the camera shutter was silent. She captured the aide's face and the bulge in his pocket before slipping the phone away. An hour later, soaked and shivering, she was cleared to leave. The drive back to Echo Heights was a blur of exhaustion. Her muscles ached, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only the hollow worry for Zoe. She parked her battered truck and pulled out her phone. A new message waited. It was not from Mrs. Chen. It was an automated email from the County Medical Assistance Fund. Her application for Zoe's subsidized inhalers had been reviewed. It was denied. Insufficient proof of income loss. A wave of helpless, cold fury washed over her. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had just pulled one of the richest men in the state from a sinking jet, a man whose family could buy the entire clinic, and she could not get the $10 copay waived for the medicine her daughter needed to breathe. She got out of the truck, the rain instantly plastering her hair to her face. She started up the steep concrete steps to her apartment and froze. Her street was blocked. A line of vehicles, at least 5 of them, sat idling in the rain. They were not police cruisers or ambulances. They were long, immaculate, black sedans gleaming like obsidian coffins under the single flickering streetlight. The air hummed with the sound of their powerful, quiet engines. A tinted rear window on the center car slid down with an electric whisper. The middle door opened. Cassian Calaveri stepped out. He had changed clothes, but he wore them badly. A dark sweater pulled hastily over trousers. He looked pale, bruised, and his hair was still damp. He smelled of the sea and the faint, sharp tang of iodine from a field dressing. He ignored the rain, his steel-gray eyes locking onto hers, cutting through the darkness. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw by the salt water. "Don't be alone tonight." Raina's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a rigid, defensive anger. She planted her feet on the wet concrete. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "This isn't a request," a man in a dark suit said, stepping forward from the lead car. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "We're providing protective escort." "I don't need protecting." "You were a witness," the man pressed, taking another step. "That makes you a variable." "Stop," Cassian said. He held up a hand, silencing his own man. He looked at Raina, his gray eyes searching her face, still shadowed by the trauma of the crash. "He's right, but he's wrong. You're not a variable. You're the reason I'm alive, and you're in danger." "I'm tired, I'm wet, and my daughter is sick," Raina retorted, her voice shaking with adrenaline and the chill. "The only danger here is you, blocking my street." A tiny, brilliant red dot appeared on the collar of her jacket. It hovered, impossibly steady, right over her pulse point. Raina froze, her breath caught in her throat. She recognized it instantly from her civil auxiliary training, a laser sight. Cassian's head snapped toward the building across the street, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Down," he commanded. His security team did not hesitate. The man who had spoken to Raina moved with blinding speed, grabbing Raina's arm, pulling her down behind the open door of the sedan. Another man was already speaking into his wrist. "Alpha team, target is high, east building, 3rd floor, window 2. Cassian crouched beside her, shielding her with his body. He looked at her, his face grim. "The jet," he said, his voice low and urgent, the thrum of the idling engines vibrating through the car door. It was not an accident. The hydraulics were compromised. Someone wanted me dead. He swallowed, the shock still visible in his eyes. They wanted it done before tomorrow's Blackshore announcement, before the new fund. Raina's mind raced, connecting the impossible dots, the blocked street, the silent, professional men, the sniper dot on her chest. They had not followed her. They had been waiting. "My daughter," Raina whispered, the words tearing from her. "My daughter is inside." "We know," Cassian said. "She's why we're here. Mrs. Chen is with her." "I'm not leaving her. I won't be separated." "You won't be," he said. "My team is inside. They're bringing her out the back way. We're all leaving together." Ra'nana looked at him, the rain dripping from her hair, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was trapped. She had no choice but to trust the most dangerous man in San Lazaro. "I have one condition," she said, her voice finding a sudden, hard strength. "Zoe, she stays with me, where I can see her, and any decision that involves her, I make it. Not you, not your men, me. Do you understand?" Cassian held her gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only a dark, disturbing acknowledgement. "Understood." Moments later, a separate black sedan pulled from the alley behind her building. Raina saw the silhouette of Mrs. Chen holding Zoe, wrapped in a blanket. "Mrs. Chen and Zoe will ride in that car." Cassian's lead security man said, "We'll take them to Shelter House Kestrel. You'll ride with Mr. Calaveri." "No," Raina said, her voice rising. "The condition, I ride with Zoe." "It's safer this way," the man said, splitting the assets. "She's not an asset," Raina shouted. "It's all right," Cassian cut in. He nodded to his man. "Let her ride in the follow car, with her daughter." The security man looked furious, but nodded once. "Change of plan. Package 1 is with the principal. Package 2 with the escort. Go." But as Raina moved toward the other car, Cassian stopped her. "No, wait. She rides with me. Put her daughter and the other woman in the third car. Flanked. It's the only way I can guarantee her condition." He looked at Raina. "I need to talk to you, and I need you to see what happens next." Before she could argue, she was guided into the back of the center sedan, the door shut with the heavy, soundless thunk of reinforced steel. The inside smelled of clean leather and ozone. Cassian sat opposite her, the cabin spacious but suffocating. The convoy pulled out, accelerating smoothly into the rain-swept streets. A satellite phone buzzed on the console. Cassian picked it up. "Mother." A woman's voice, elegant and controlled, filtered through the speaker. Raina could only hear his side of the conversation. I'm alive." "Yes, the jet is gone. I don't know who—" "Not yet." He paused, listening. His jaw tightened. "No, I'm not letting the family handle this. This was a direct strike, not some dock dispute. I will handle it. Mother, I have to go." He ended the call, cutting her off, and tossed the phone onto the seat. He ran a hand through his damp hair, the picture of a man holding himself together by a thread. "My family," he said, the word tasting like ash, "prefers the old ways, an eye for an eye. I'm trying to build something else." Ra'nana watched him, her fear warring with the instinct that had made her jump into the water. "When I was giving my statement," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I saw one of your men. He took something from the wreckage." Cassian's head snapped up. Raina pulled out her phone, her hands surprisingly steady. She opened the photo and handed it to him. The image was grainy, backlit by the pier lights, but clear enough the aid, the furtive look, the distinct shape of the hardened case in his pocket. Cassian stared at it, his face turning pale. "The E-slate." "The black box," Raina confirmed. "More than that," he breathed. "It's a temporary drive. It holds the last 12 hours of flight data, but it also logs all satellite communications, encrypted, but it's all there." He looked at her, a new, sharp respect in his eyes. "You're not just a rescuer." "I'm a mother who needs to get her daughter's prescription filled," Raina said bitterly. Why does that slate matter so much? Because, Cassian said, I'm in the process of closing a fund. It's called Nocturne. He leaned forward, the car's interior lights casting harsh shadows across his face. It's the part of Blackshore that my father built, the gray money, the leverage, the operations that don't make it into the annual report. I'm shutting it down. All of it. I'm rerouting those assets into a legitimate foundation for medical technology. He paused. This move has made a certain shadow group people who relied on Nocturne for their own enterprises extremely angry. So you're trying to go clean, and they tried to kill you for it. That's the theory. Raina shook her head, pulling her phone back. This is not my world, Mr. Calaveri. I just want to be left alone. I want my daughter to be safe, and I want to go home. I know, Cassian said softly, but to get to alone, we have to get through this storm. The convoy slowed for a red light at a major intersection. On the right was a massive, 24-hour construction site, a skeleton of steel girders rising into the night. Raina saw it first, a dark, lifted pickup truck in the opposite lane, its engine roaring too loud, its headlights off. It did not wait for the light. It jumped the median, barreling straight for the side of their sedan, straight for Raina's door. She did not scream. She braced. But Cassian's driver was not a normal driver. He hit the accelerator, not the brake. The sedan shot forward while the car in front of them slammed its brakes and angled hard, sideswiping the pickup. The truck spun out, crashing through the temporary fencing of the construction site, where it became high-centered on a pile of rebar. It all happened in less than 3 seconds. The convoy did not stop. It flowed through the intersection, accelerating to a speed that was well past legal. Raina was breathing hard, her hands clamped to the seat. It was real. The sniper, the crash, the attack, it was all real. The cars finally slowed, turning onto a private, unmarked road, climbing high into the hills above the bay. They passed through a steel gate and pulled into the courtyard of a house that looked more like a fortress, all modern glass and dark wood, hidden by cypress trees. The door of the third car was already open. "Mommy!" Zoe, tiny and fierce, launched herself from Mrs. Chen's arms and ran across the wet pavement. Raina met her halfway, dropping to her knees and enveloping her in an embrace that ached with relief. Zoe coughed, a dry, rattling sound, and buried her face in Raina's neck. "It's okay, mija. It's okay. Mommy's here." Cassian stood back by his car, the rain plastering his sweater to his frame. He watched the mother and daughter, his face unreadable. But the tension in his shoulders eased. The haunted, hunted look in his eyes softened, just for a moment, as if their embrace was the first real thing he had seen since crawling from the wreckage. He was a man pulled back from the edge of a deep, cold abyss. Shelter House Kestrel was not a bunker. It was a fortress of glass and dark. Oiled wood perched high in the hills, invisible from the city, yet possessing a commanding view of the old San Lazaro docks below. The air inside was warm and still, a stark contrast to the chaos of the bay. Security was invisible, but absolute. Cassian called them his white unit, a private team that moved with silent, predictive efficiency. Mrs. Chen and Zoe were settled in a comfortable guest wing, the older woman immediately impressed by the kitchen, Zoe by the thickness of the carpets. Raina, however, was brought to a central command room. It was a space of low light and glowing screens, monitoring the perimeter, the city, and the airspace. "I need a full maritime chart of the harbor, updated within the last week," Raina said, her exhaustion burned away by a cold, sharp focus. She was no longer just a rescuer. She was an investigator. "And I need the actual flight telemetry, not just the stolen slate your man pocketed." Cassian, his face pale and bruised, nodded. He was nursing a cup of black coffee that did nothing to hide the tremor in his hands. A technician brought the data up on a massive wall screen. Raina leaned in, her experience as a port auxiliary kicking in. She tracked the jet's approach, her finger tracing the glowing red line. "There," she said, tapping the screen. "That's wrong. He's way off the standard approach. He dropped altitude right here, over Sector 9. What is Sector 9? Cashin asked. It's a temporarily restricted zone, Raina explained. The FDCI, the Federal Directorate of Commerce Integrity, is running commercial drone tests there. Nothing, not even a seagull, is supposed to fly below 2,000 feet in that box. As she worked, a private terminal on Cashin's desk chimed. A secure, anonymous file transfer had just completed. He opened it. The screen filled with a complex diagram, a web of interconnected lines that looked like a neural map. It was titled Serrate Spine. Raina glanced over. It was a flowchart, showing money moving from known Blackshore accounts, funneling through dozens of tech startups she had never heard of, and finally concentrating in a single dark node at the center, the Axiom Cabal. Cassian's breath hitched. He knew those names. They were the very operations he was trying to sever with his Nocturne fund. This was the blueprint of the enemy. A man entered the room. He was impeccably dressed in a suit that cost more than Raina's truck. His face smooth and concerned. Lyle Vesper, Cassian's chief of staff, his most trusted advisor. Cass, Lyle said, his voice a concerned hush. This is madness. The jet, the attack on the street, this is beyond a simple business dispute. You have to turn this over to the family. Let your mother handle this. In the classic way. Cashin's eyes remained fixed on the serrate spine diagram. The classic way is what I am trying to escape, Lyle. Escaping it is getting you killed, Lyle insisted, his voice rising. This is not the time for reform. This is the time for survival. Cassian's jaw tightened. He was caught, balanced on the knife edge between the old world of blood loyalty and the new one he was trying to build. Not yet, he said, his voice flat. Raina ignored their internal politics. The passenger manifest. She said, I need to see it. Lyle looked ready to refuse, citing protocol, but Cassian just nodded. Show her. The list appeared. It was short. 2 pilots, 3 aides, and 1 name, heavily redacted, marked canceled. Who was this? Raina asked. Cassian zoomed in on the seat assignment. He looked at it for a long moment. A potential investor for the new foundation. He canceled 30 minutes before takeoff. I moved into his seat to take a private call. The silence in the room was absolute. The attack was not random. The sabotage, the explosion. The failure, it was meant for that specific seat. It was meant for the canceled guest. Or perhaps Cassian was never the primary target at all. Raina felt a sudden, suffocating need for air. She stepped onto a high balcony overlooking the distant, glittering lights of the port. She pulled out her phone and dialed Mrs. Chen's room. Zoe's face, pixelated and sleepy, filled the screen. Mommy, is it morning? Not yet, Mia, Raina whispered, her voice thick. I needed to see your face. Zoe's cough sounded better, looser in the dry, filtered air of the house. She held up a piece of paper. A chaotic drawing in purple and blue. Look, Mrs. Chen gave me crayons. It's a dolphin kite for the beach. Raina laughed, a rusty, broken sound. It's beautiful. Baby, it's perfect. She had not heard Cassian approach. He stood in the doorway, watching the simple, uncomplicated love radiate from the tiny screen. When Zoe, seeing the shadow man, waved, Cassian slowly, almost hesitantly, raised a hand. A small, unfamiliar smile touched the corner of his mouth before vanishing. As the call ended, Raina turned. The smile was gone. Cassian swayed, putting a hand against the glass to steady himself. Sir, one of the white unit medics said, appearing from nowhere. The doctor's report. You have significant acoustic trauma from the blast pressure. You're in shock. You need to rest. I'm fine, Cassian bit out, waving the man off. No, you're not, Raina said, stepping forward. The medic, seeing an opening, handed her a small bottle of pills and a glass of water. You're gray, Raina stated, all the authority of her rescue training in her voice. Sit down. Take these now. He looked ready to argue, this man who commanded a private army. But Raina's gaze was absolute. The same look she used on a panicked victim in cold water. He sat. She tapped 2 pills into her own palm. When he reached for them, his hand was shaking. A fine, uncontrollable tremor from the shock and the cold. She closed her hand, then gently took his, turning it palm up. She placed the pills into his center of his hand. Her fingers were warm from holding the phone. His skin was ice cold. The simple, functional contact was electric. It was just a touch, a transfer of medication, but it crackled in the air between them. He swallowed the pills, his eyes never leaving hers, and a silent, startled acknowledgement passed between them. "We have a problem," the head of the white unit said from the command center, breaking the spell. "Perimeter camera, Gate 3, civilian vehicle, loitering, 4 passes in the last 10 minutes. The screen zoomed, capturing a blurry license plate on a plain sedan. "Run it," Cassian ordered, his voice already sounding steadier. The search was fast, pulling from a database that was clearly not available to the public. Registered to a shell company. Driver ID pings, Keen Ravel, active agent, MOTB. Reina's blood ran cold. Ravel, I know that name. He was lead investigator on a container theft ring at Pier 4 last year. It was a huge case. Then, overnight, he was gone, transferred to traffic duty. The entire case was buried. She looked at the monitors, her mind racing, connecting the disparate threads. The MOTB is a city agency. The FDCI, the drone testing, that's federal. Why is a city cop sniffing around your crash site? Why was he the one investigating the port? She turned to Cassian, her eyes wide. "This isn't just your family. Cassian, this is an alliance, a multi-level alliance, and they are all protecting the serrate spine." Cassian stood up, the hesitation gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "The E slate is compromised," he said. "The original is gone, but Blackshore keeps triple redundancies. There is a backup server at the Civic 1 Plaza." "You cannot go there," Lyle Vesper interjected, his voice sharp with alarm. "It's a public building. It's a glass tower, far too exposed." "Which is exactly why it's perfect," Cassian said. "We will go tomorrow night. No motorcade, no white unit, just me." Reina stepped out of the shadows. "You'll never get past the new security protocols. They'll be looking for you, but," she said, a hard smile touching her lips, "they won't be looking for a late-night maintenance crew." Cassian looked at her, a new understanding dawning. "Just me and you." He turned to his chief of staff. "And you, Lyle," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "will tell no one, especially not my mother." Civic 1 Plaza was not a fortress. It was a glass tower, a monument to transparent commerce. And at 2 a.m, it was a tomb of marble and recycled air. Reina and Cassian did not use the grand lobby. They used a steel service door in the underground loading bay, accessed with a forged maintenance order Reina had routed through the city Port Authority system. They wore nondescript gray coveralls, smelling faintly of cleaning solvent. The service elevator was slow, whining as it climbed. The light rain of the evening had become a steady, driving downpour, and it hissed through the ventilation shafts, a constant, whispering presence. The sub-level server room was protected by a hybrid biometric lock. "It requires my thumbprint," Cassian murmured, his voice low in the concrete shaft, "and a secondary authorization from my security chief." Lyle Vesper, Reina stated. "Yes. So we're locked out." "No," Cassian said. "My father insisted on an emergency override. My print, entered twice, flags the system but grants access." He pressed his thumb to the scanner. It flashed amber. He pressed it again. It clicked green. "It logs the entry as irregular. It buys us time, but not much." The heavy door slid open with a rush of frigid, filtered air. The room was a dark cathedral of data, aisles of black server racks blinking with thousands of tiny blue and green lights. The hum was so low it was felt more than heard. Cassian moved to the Blackshore Legacy rack, his fingers flying across a terminal, attaching a small, hardened drive. This is it. While he initiated the transfer, Reina moved to the main access log terminal. Her instincts were screaming. You said Vesper was your most trusted man. He advised you to go to your mother, to handle this the old way. He did. If he's the traitor, he would have come here first, Raina said, her voice flat. He would have needed to know what was on the e-slate he stole. Her fingers tapped, bypassing the polite user interface, pulling the raw command log. There it was. Entry time 03:15, less than 24 hours ago, just hours after the crash. User L, Vesper, authentication priority override. She did not say anything. She just touched Cassian's arm. He turned from his screen, his face tight with concentration. He followed her gaze to the log entry. He did not move. He did not curse. But Raina saw the shift. It was not the sudden shock of betrayal. It was the cold, hollow sickness of confirmation. The man who had been a second father to him, the man who had advised him to hide, was the one holding the knife. As Cassian stared at the screen, the main lights in the server room clicked off. They were plunged into near total darkness, lit only by the constellations of server lights. A silent alarm. The irregular log, Raina whispered, her voice sharp. It triggered a physical sweep. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor, the scrape of a keycard. The main door to the server room began to hiss open. Raina grabbed Cassian's coverall and yanked him, hard, pulling him with her into the narrow, dark aisle between two towering server racks. They pressed their backs against the cold metal, enveloped in shadow. The space was barely 2 feet wide. They were forced together, chest to chest, a sudden suffocating intimacy. Raina was pressed against him, close enough to feel the solid, tense muscles of his chest and the surprising heat radiating from his skin. She could smell the cold ozone from the machines, the faint trace of antiseptic soap from the safe house, and the sharp, metallic tang of his adrenaline. Her face was so close to his shoulder she could feel the shallow, controlled rasp of his breathing against her temple. A bright white beam from a heavy flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping the main aisle. The security guard was methodical. His boots crunched on the raised floor. He paused, listening to the hum of the racks. Raina held her breath. Cassian was absolutely still, a wall of rigid muscle against her. His hand had moved, resting protectively on the small of her back, a silent, anchoring weight. The guard swept his light down the aisle next to theirs. The beam was so bright it illuminated the dust motes dancing between the racks. After what felt like an eternity, the guard grunted, satisfied. The flashlight beam moved away. The door hissed shut. The main lights flickered back on. Neither of them moved for a full 10 seconds. Raina was acutely aware of his hand on her back, burning through the thin fabric. Cassian pulled away slowly, and the sudden loss of contact left her skin feeling cold and exposed. "We have to go," he said, his voice rough. He returned to his terminal. The file was downloaded. Nocturne Ledger Alt. He tried to open it on the terminal. Access denied. "It's locked," he hissed. "A secondary encryption. It requires my personal code and an audio signature, a passphrase." "A voice print?" "No, something else. A sound file. My father set it up, only he knew it." Cassian slammed his hand against the rack, a rare break in his control. "It's useless. Vesper must have known he could not open it either." Raina looked at the diagnostic screen. It showed the required audio wavelength. It was not the shape of a human voice. It was a complex waveform, a high, sharp spike followed by a long, vibrating decay. She stared at it. "It's not a word," she whispered. "It's a sound. I know that sound." She pulled her own phone from her pocket, the waterproof, rugged device she used on the docks. She scrolled past photos of Zoe, past maintenance logs, to her audio library. She had dozens of recordings, engine failures, hull groans, specific warning bells. "Last month," she said, her fingers flying, "there was a Santa Ana windstorm. A freighter at Pier 4 snapped a mooring line. The wind was hitting the rigging so hard it sounded like screaming." She found the file, SLA_mast_howl_04. She held the phone speaker to the terminal's built-in microphone and pressed play. A high-pitched, metallic shriek filled the cold room. It was a lonely, violent sound. On the screen, the input wavelength vibrated, matched the required pattern, and the lock icon turned green. Access granted. "Let's go," Cassian said, pulling the drive. They ran for the service elevator. He swiped his card. The panel flashed red. Access denied. "He locked us in," Cassian spat, realizing the guard's sweep was just a distraction. "Vesper, he knew we'd come." "He locked the doors," Raina said, looking up. "But he forgot the ceiling." She pointed to an emergency ventilation shaft. "That leads to the roof access plenum." Before he could object, she was unzipping her coveralls. She had a coiled rope of black, high-tensile rescue line strapped around her waist. She grabbed a heavy-duty wrench from a nearby toolkit, secured it to the server rack's structural frame, and attached the line. She gave it 3 hard, professional tugs. "You first," as she said. "It's a 20-foot climb, then a crawl space." Cassian looked at the thin rope, then at her. He was a man of armored cars and boardrooms. "Go," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Hand over hand, use your feet against the rack. Do not look down." He saw the absolute certainty in her eyes, the same certainty that had pulled him from the sinking jet. He trusted it. He grabbed the line and began to climb. Raina followed, moving up the rope with an easy, fluid strength. They emerged onto the flat, tar-papered roof into a wall of wind and water. The rain was torrential now, hitting them in horizontal sheets. The city was a glittering, blurry jewel far below. Cassian was leaning against an HVAC unit, breathing hard, the climb and the tension having taken their toll. Raina moved to him. "All business. Did you twist anything on the climb?" "I'm fine," he said, pushing wet hair from his eyes. "You're shaking," she observed. She placed her hand flat on his chest, right over his heart, a clinical check for the rattling impact of a hard landing. His heart was hammering against her palm, a frantic, powerful rhythm. His skin was hot, even through the soaked coveralls. He caught her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, pressing her palm tighter against his chest. He did not say thank you. He did not have to. His gray eyes, stark and silver in the stormlight, were raw with an emotion she could not name. They stood frozen for a beat, the world reduced to the roar of the wind and the frantic, shared rhythm of their hearts. The vibration of a phone broke the spell. It was Cassian's burner. He reluctantly released her hand, pulling the phone from his pocket. The screen lit up. "Mother," he answered, his voice sharp. "What?" Gia Calaveri's voice was like shaved ice. "Whatever you just did. Cassian, it is done. You just kicked the hornet's nest. The Axiom Cabal knows you have the ledger. They are moving." Cassian looked at Raina, who stood bracing herself against the wind. Her face streaked with rain, her eyes steady and waiting. "Let them come," he said, and ended the call. The path back to his old life was gone. The bridge was not just burned, it was annihilated. He slipped the phone into his pocket, the stolen drive a heavy weight against his chest, and followed her toward the fire escape. They made it back to Kestrel as the storm broke its leash. The drive was a silent, high-speed blur, but the moment the main door of the shelter house sealed, the adrenaline that had held them together on the roof evaporated, leaving them soaked, exhausted, and vibrating with tension. The house was quiet. Zoe and Mrs. Chen were asleep. The low-pressure system stalled directly over the bay, rattling the massive, reinforced windows in their frames. The sea below was no longer a glittering map. It was a roaring, black void. The lights in the command room flickered, buzzed, and died, plunging them into absolute darkness for 3 seconds before the backup generators kicked in with a steady, reassuring hum. In the sudden silence, Raina shivered. The cold, which she had ignored for hours, sank its teeth into her. It was deep, rattling her bones. Cassian, his own face pale and streaked with rain, turned from a rack of drying equipment. He was holding a thick, dark gray cashmere sweater. It looked impossibly soft. "Here," he said, his voice rough. She started to protest, a reflexive, "I'm fine," but her jaw was trembling too hard to form the words. He stepped forward, not handing it to her, but holding it open. It was a gesture of such simple care it disarmed her. She raised her arms, too tired to argue, and he guided the heavy wool over her head. His movements were careful, almost hesitant. As he settled the sweater onto her shoulders, his fingers brushed the cold, wet skin of her neck, just below her hairline. The touch was accidental. It was functional, but it lingered. The contact, skin on skin, was a sudden jolt of warmth in the cold room. They both froze. The air, already charged with the theft of the ledger and the roar of the ocean, became intensely still. "Thank you," Raina whispered, pulling the sleeves over her freezing hands. The sleeves were far too long. For the sweater, Cassian did not pull back immediately. He let his hand rest for a second on her shoulder. "You saved my life. Twice tonight. I think I owe you a sweater." He moved to the window, staring out at the whitecaps he could just make out in the dark. Raina joined him, folding her arms, dwarfed by the cashmere. "You're still shaking." He clenched his jaw. "The acoustic trauma, the doctor said the blast pressure, It's not just the blast," she said quietly. "It's him. Vesper, the confirmation." His silence was stark. "I recognize that look," Raina continued, her voice so low it was almost lost in the storm. "The moment you realize the person you trusted to watch your back is the one who left you to drown." He turned, his gray eyes searching her face in the dim, auxiliary light. "Zoe's father," Raina clarified, the words still tasting like rust after all these years. "He disappeared the day I told him I was pregnant. Just vanished. I was waiting tables, trying to get my port certification. I was so terrified, not of being alone, but of failing her, of being a weight she would one day have to carry." Cassian listened, his expression stripped of all its usual armor. "I was never afraid of being a burden," he countered, his voice deep. "I was afraid of becoming a reflection. My father's reflection." He gestured to the opulent, empty room. "I grew up in a house bigger than this, all glass and polished marble, but I cannot remember my mother or father ever hugging me. Not once. Everything was a transaction. Loyalty, duty, power, love was a liability." He looked at her, at the raw strength in her shoulders, the exhaustion under her eyes. "This situation," he said carefully, "we are trapped here. You are here because of what I am. I will not use that. I will not manipulate this." Raina met his gaze, unflinching. "And I am not a damsel. Cassian, I am not looking for a rescue. I am trying to keep my daughter safe. Whatever this thing is between us," she motioned with her hand. "It has to be real, voluntary. Clear eyes." "Clear eyes," he repeated, the words sounding like a vow. He took a half step. The space between them was now measured in inches. He raised his hand, moving slowly, giving her every chance to move away, to stop him. He did not touch her face. He let his knuckles graze the sharp line of her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent a tremor through her. He paused, his eyes asking the question his voice would not. It was not a request for passion. It was a request for permission. Raina's breath hitched. She gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. Cassian leaned in. The first kiss was not a collision. It was a discovery. His lips were cool from the rain, tasting faintly of salt. It was hesitant, slow, a gentle pressure that asked, "Are you sure?" She leaned into it, her eyes closing, her entire body answering yes. He let out a long, unsteady breath, a breath he seemed to have been holding since the jet first hit the water. The kiss deepened, but only slightly. It was a kiss of shared trauma, of profound exhaustion, of a sudden, startling relief. He pulled back, just enough to breathe, to look at her. A small, almost pained smile touched his mouth. She smiled back, a genuine, tired smile that reached her eyes. This time, when he kissed her, it was sure. He slid one hand from her jaw, cupping the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her still, damp hair. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was not a violent pull. It was an anchor finding purchase in the storm. He held her securely, his hands firm and safe on her back and shoulders. A protective, solid embrace. Raina's hands came up, gripping his forearms, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world, the warmth of the sweater, the heat of his body, the steady, frantic beat of his heart against her own. It was overwhelming. He whispered her name, Raina. The sound of a rough prayer against her skin. She answered with his, Cass. Her voice muffled against his mouth. Their movements were slow, deliberate, driven by a deep, aching need for comfort that was rapidly transforming into desire. He guided her backward, moving them away from the cold glass of the window, deeper into the shadows of the room. The heavy cashmere sweater he had given her slid from one shoulder, unnoticed, pooling at her waist, hands clasped, fingers intertwined. The storm outside raged, a violent backdrop to the quiet in the shelter house. The only sounds were their soft, unsteady breaths and the rustle of clothing as he deepened the kiss. A silent, desperate, and certain connection. Later, they lay side by side on a low sofa, covered by a dry blanket. The storm had lessened to a steady, drumming rain. They were not talking about the ledger or the cabal or the crash. She wants a dolphin kite, Raina murmured, staring at the dark ceiling. A what? Zoe, for the beach, if we ever get to go again. We will, Cassian said. He sounded surprised by his own certainty. There's a taco truck in Echo Heights, on Cesar Chavez, best al pastor in the city. Raina turned her head, smiling in the dark. El Gallo, you have been there. My father would have a stroke if he knew, Cassian admitted, but sometimes a man needs a real taco. The casual, normal words hung in the air, a fragile picture of a future that seemed impossible. Cassian's tone turned serious. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in the dim light. Her asthma, the medication you were denied. When this is over, I am going to fix it. The Nocturne Fund was always meant for this. I will get her the best doctor, the best clinic, whatever she needs. I promise you, Raina. Raina looked at him, seeing not the billionaire heir, but the man who had climbed a rope in the dark. I believe you. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was a touch of profound tenderness, a seal on the promise. A phone buzzed, not his, but hers. It was a secure text from the white unit technician monitoring the dark web. Raina sat up, pulling the blanket with her. She read the message, her blood turning to ice. What is it? She looked at Cassian, her face pale but her eyes burning with a new fire. They know. The Axiom Cabal has officially put a price on our heads. Bounty. Open contract. To anyone. Cassian was on his feet in an instant, his body tense, the warrior returning. I'll call my team. We move. We find another shelter house. We go underground. No, Raina said. She stood up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like a cape. She looked at him, her resolve forged in the fire of the last 24 hours. We do not run. We do not hide. That is what they expect. That is your father's move. You want to be different. She nodded toward the drive containing the ledger. We expose them, all of them. Running was no longer an option. Attacking was the only path. The first move was to protect the asset that mattered. And before sunrise, Raina watched as Zoe, still half asleep and clutching her new dolphin kite drawing, was buckled into the back of an armored SUV with Mrs. Chen. Two of the white unit's most trusted female operatives, disguised as nuns, drove them. Their destination was the Hummingbird Children's Station, a high-security charitable facility so deep within the city's philanthropic network that not even Blackshore's legitimate arm knew who funded it. Raina's hug was tight, her whisper fierce. Be good for Mrs. Chen. I will see you very, very soon. With Zoe secured, the board was set. Cassian received a single text. Summons. Sanctus. Now. G. The meeting place was a deconsecrated cathedral in the warehouse district, a place of crumbling saints and broken stained glass. His mother, Gia Calaveri, stood alone at the altar, her posture as rigid as the stone apostles flanking her. She was not the warm, forgiving type. She was the matriarch of a dynasty, and she looked disappointed. "You have chosen a public war, Cassian," and she stated, her voice echoed in the vast, empty space. "It is messy and loud." "Lyle Vesper is the traitor," Cassian said, cutting straight to the point. "He works for the Axiom Cabal. The crash, the attacks, it was all him." Gia's face remained impassive. "I know. Lyle was always ambitious, but he is a symptom, not the disease." She stepped down from the dais. "You think Black Shore is just ships and money. It is influence. Years ago, to secure our control of the San Lazaro shipping lanes, your father made an arrangement, a legal firewall." "With who?" "A faction within the FDCI," Gia confessed. "We received exclusive, priority clearance on all transport logistics. In exchange, we provided financial cover for their off-book operations. The ones that became the Axiom Cabal, Lyle was the intermediary." Reyna, standing in the shadows by a pillar, felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The FDCI controlled the restricted airspace where the jet was sabotaged. Black Shore's deal had given the traitors the very access they needed to attempt the assassination. "You are trying to cut off the head," Gia continued, "but you do not even see the body. You have the ledger, but it only shows the money. It does not show the masters." She reached up, pulling a long, wicked-looking pin of polished black obsidian from her hair. "Your father gave this to me. He called it his insurance policy." She pressed it into Cassian's hand. "It is old world, but the technology inside is new. A nano memory card. It contains the other list, not the accounts, the buyers, the politicians, the judges, the federal directors who are on the Cabal's payroll." As Cassian's fingers closed around the pin, the heavy front doors of the cathedral groaned open. Lyle Vesper walked in, flanked by two men who were not Black Shore security. He smiled, a smooth, political gesture. "Gia, Cass, thank God you are safe. I have been trying to reach you. The Cabal is in chaos. They are purging internal threats. We must consolidate. Your mother and I have already discussed the terms of a truce." Cassian looked at his mother. She had not flinched. She had been stalling. Reyna stepped forward into the light. Lyle's eyes flickered to her, his smile tightening. "I am sorry, Mr. Vesper," Reyna said, her voice clear and calm. "But what is that you are wearing?" Lyle looked down at his lapel. "It is cologne, from Milan." "No," Reyna said, taking another step. "Not the cologne. The other smell. Underneath." She sniffed the air, her senses sharp from years on the water, identifying chemicals by scent. "It is a specialized solvent, a polymer conditioner for high-impact data housing, the same smell that was on the E-slate I pulled from the water, the one your man stole for you." Lyle's smile vanished. The mask was off. "She is clever," he said to Cassian, his voice losing its warmth, turning cold and flat. "A pity you brought her into this. I was supposed to kill the investor in that seat. You moving was an inconvenience. Then you survived the crash. That was problematic." "You did this," Cassian stated, but his voice a low growl. "For money." "Money," Lyle laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "This is not about money, you naive boy. It is about control. Your father understood that. You, with your nocturne charity and your medical tech. You were dissolving the empire. You were giving away the one thing that mattered, the leverage. The Axiom Cabal does not just want Black Shore's bank. They want its network, its access, its fear. I was simply giving them what they were owed. And removing me," Cassian finished. "You were a sentimental infection," Lyle spat. "One I intended to cure." He nodded to his men. They raised their weapons, polymer pistols that made almost no sound. But the white unit, positioned in the choir loft, was faster. The first shot was a deafening crack that shattered the silence. echoing like the wrath of God. Lyle's men returned fire. A chip of stone exploded from the pillar near Reyna. Gia cried out, a sharp intake of breath, clutching her shoulder as a ricochet grazed her arm, drawing blood. Reyna did not hesitate. She grabbed Gia, pulling the older woman down behind the solid marble altar. "Cover!" she yelled. She saw a red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. She ripped it from its housing, aimed it toward the doorway, and depressed the handle. A massive cloud of white chemical fog instantly filled the nave, obscuring everything in a choking, cold mist. "Now!" she screamed. Cassian and the white unit moved through the smoke. Reyna heard shouting, the dull thud of bodies hitting the pews. When the smoke cleared, Lyle's men were down, neutralized by non-lethal rounds. Lyle himself was on his knees, his weapon kicked away. Cassian stood over him, his own pistol aimed directly at Vesper's forehead. This was the moment, the old way that Gia and his father lived by. An eye for an eye, a death for a betrayal. Lyle stared up, panting, terror in his eyes. "You do not have it in you, Cassian. You are not your father." Cassian's hand was steady. His jaw was stone. He looked at the man who had been his mentor, his friend. Then he lowered the gun. "No," Cassian said, his voice raw. "I am not." He ejected the clip, letting it clatter to the floor. "He is done. By the law." Gia, clutching her bleeding arm, watched her son with a look of stunned, painful pride. They left Vesper and his men zip-tied for the MOTB agents that keen Ravel. The clean cop was dispatching. Back in a new, sterile safe house, a high-rise apartment this time, the adrenaline began to fade. "We have the ledger and the buyer's list," Cassian said, pacing. "We have Vesper, but we do not have the head. We do not have the Axiom Cabal itself." Reyna was sitting at a laptop, listening to an audio file. "Maybe we do," she said. She pressed play. It was Zoe's voice, humming the Dolphin Kite song. Then, a new voice, a woman's, sharp and professional, filtered through. "Do not care about the logistics. Just make sure the Bright Wharf Gala is flawless. The investors need to see this as a clean initiative. The Nocturne Fund is dead. Bright Wharf is the new face." "What is that?" Cassian asked. "Zoe," Reyna said, a small, proud smile on her face. She was playing a game on the tablet in the car. It was still recording when one of the nun bodyguards took a phone call. She pointed to the screen. "I tracked the name on the call log, a top-tier brand consultant. She is the public face of the Bright Wharf Gala, the biggest philanthropic event of the year." "Bright Wharf," Cassian whispered. "It is the shell company they are using to rebrand the money they were stealing from Nocturne. They are laundering their reputation in public." Reyna looked up at him, her eyes hard as steel. "It is a gala. It will be full of press, politicians, the very people on your mother's obsidian pin. They will all be in one room, broadcast on live television." "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Reyna said, "we stop leaking information. We stop fighting in churches. We go to the party, and we crash it. We put the ledger and the buyer's list on every screen in that ballroom. We expose them all, at once. Live." Cassian stared at her, grasping the sheer, terrifying audacity of the plan. "Reyna," he said slowly, "if we do that, it does not just burn Vesper. It burns the FDCI partners. It burns the foundation of Blackshore. It burns my mother. It burns every bridge I have." Reyna met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I know," she said. "It is not a bridge. Cass, it is the exit." The Bright Wharf Gala was not a party. It was a coronation, held in the soaring glass atrium of the Harbor Line Pavilion. It was designed to overwhelm the senses with light, sound, and the sheer spectacle of philanthropic power. Hundreds of the city's elite moved across the marble floors, the sound of their voices and the clinking of champagne glasses echoing over a live string quartet. Ranana Ortiz was invisible. She wore a black technical polo, black cargo pants, and a heavy utility belt, her hair pulled back under a communications headset. She was just another AV technician, checking cabling in the shadows of the main stage. Cassian Calaveri, in contrast, was designed to be seen. He moved through the front entrance, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, the picture of effortless wealth. He presented an invitation, not paper, but a digital token on a pristine, unmarked smartphone. It was an access key generated from the Axiom Cabal's own encrypted cryptocurrency ledger, identifying him as an anonymous, high-tier donor. He was too rich to be questioned. They had rehearsed the plan in the sterile silence of the high-rise safe house. The keynote address was at 9 o'clock. The main lighting cue for the speech was programmed as Sapphire. The moment those lights turned blue, "I'm moving to the podium," Cassian had briefed her, his voice low and tight. "That's your signal. I'll talk for as long as I can. You get 90 seconds, maybe less. You upload the Nocturne Ledger and the Obsidian pin list, both, to the main screens and the live broadcast feed. The moment it's confirmed, you leave." Just before he was scheduled to enter the main hall, he found her in a dark service corridor. The muffled sound of the quartet filtered through the drywall, a strange, elegant backdrop to their conspiracy. He grabbed her arm, his grip urgent. "Raina, the white unit has an exit route at loading bay 3. The instant the upload is green, you go. Do not wait for me. Do not look back. That is an order." She looked at him, her face calm, almost serene under the dim emergency light. She reached up, not to touch his face, but to straighten the knot of his black tie, a small, proprietary gesture that felt more intimate than a kiss. "When you get up there," she whispered, her voice a solid line of steel. "Do not lower your voice when you speak the truth. They need to hear every single word." He covered her hand with his, pressing her fingers against the starched white of his shirt. "Just for a second. See you on the other side." She climbed the gantry to the AV booth, a small, dark room high above the crowd. From her perch, she watched him merge into the sea of black ties, a ghost returning to his own world. He glanced up once, his gray eyes finding her in the darkness. It was not a look of romance. It was a look of shared resolve, an anchor in the glittering sea of enemies. It was enough. A man in a cheap, rumpled suit slipped into the booth. Raina's hand instinctively dropped to the heavy wrench on her belt. "Oh, easy," the man said. It was Keen Ravel, the disgraced MOTB agent. His face was slick with sweat. "I have been watching traffic patterns for 6 months, ever since they buried me for getting too close to that peer investigation. I'm done being silent." He slid a worn plastic keycard across the console. "Axiom Security is running a proprietary firewall on the broadcast. The second you try to uplink, they'll shut you down." He tapped the card. "That's the master override. It's the only key I had. It'll give you priority. That is all I can do." He was gone before she could say a word. A second, softer presence appeared at the door. Gia Calaveri. She looked regal, even with her arm in an elegant black silk sling. She walked straight to Raina, her eyes filled with a heavy, unreadable emotion. She held out the obsidian hairpin. "Cassian has chosen his path. It is not his father's," she said, her voice a low murmur. "But this," she pressed the cold, heavy pin into Raina's hand. "This is the insurance. This is what my husband built. If I fell..." She looked Raina dead in the eye, matriarch to mother. "If we fail, you fix it. You use this. You burn them all to the ground." Raina closed her hand around the pin. Down below, the applause shifted. The woman from Zoe's recording, the gala's host, was beaming at the crowd. And now, a very special surprise announcement. Please welcome a visionary new partner, Mr. Cassian Calaveri. The music swelled, the lights shifted, bathing the stage and the ballroom in a deep, perfect sapphire. This was it. Raina's fingers flew, sliding Keen Ravel's keycard into the console. Override accepted. Cassian stepped into the spotlight, the very picture of philanthropic grace. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the live cameras. He opened his mouth. before a single word could escape. The massive LED screen behind him, 30 feet high, flickered. It cut from the bright wharf logo to static, then to a crystal-clear, live feed of a man in a dark, comfortable study. It was Lyle Vesper. He smiled, a wide, predatory smile. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." His voice boomed through the ballroom, amplified by Raina's own sound system. "And welcome to the real gala." A wave of polite, confused laughter rippled through the audience. They applauded. They thought it was part of the show. "My apologies for the interruption," Lyle continued, his eyes seeming to bore straight through the camera, past the crowd, finding Cassian on the stage. "But there has been a change in management. Hello, brother." On the stage, Cassian went absolutely still. Raina looked down. At every exit, dark-suited men, Axiom security, were calmly, quietly locking the ballroom doors. They were trapped. "He is on a shadow server," Raina hissed, her hands flying. Ravel's keycard was dead. The firewall was back up. Lyle had anticipated the bypass. Lyle was laughing now. "A toast," he said, "to the end of the sentimental Calaveri line. Security, please escort Mr. Calaveri from the stage. He seems unwell." "No," Raina whispered. She ripped a panel from the server rack, exposing the raw physical ports. She jammed the obsidian pin's connector and the ledger drive into a hard-line bypass. The terminal screen flashed. "Access denied, secondary audio key required." It was the same lock, the one from the Civic One Plaza, the one his father built. She slammed the mast howl file into the system. Failed. It was a different key. She was locked out. Cassian was trapped, a spotlight pinning him as two Axiom guards walked onto the stage. Raina felt sick. She opened her tablet, her hand instinctively going to the video file of Zoe in the safe house. "I just need to hear her voice." She played it, the audio feeding directly into her headset, Zoe's small, clear voice. "And it's a dolphin kite. Mommy for the beach." Raina opened the audio analysis software, her mind racing, and then she saw it. The waveform, the specific, unique intonation of Zoe's voice as she said, "for the beach," was a complex, multi-toned spike. She ran it against the lock's diagnostic. A perfect match. It was not the sound of the mast, it was the vocal pattern. 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance. His father, in a moment of hidden sentimentality, had used his own son's voice years ago as the key, and Zoe, by sheer chance, had replicated the exact intonation. The recording was too noisy. It would not pass the filter. Lyle was gloating. The guards were reaching for Cassian. Raina looked at the phone patch on her console. She had one chance. She routed the connection, bypassing the audio in, and dialed the secure line to the Hummingbird station. The secure line to the Hummingbird station rang twice. A female voice answered. "One of the white unit operatives. This line is cold. Speak." This is Raina," she said, her voice ice calm. "I need my daughter. Put her on now." Down on the stage, the two Axiom guards were 3 feet from Cassian. Lyle Vesper watched from the main screen, a smirk of absolute victory on his face. Mommy Zoe's voice was tiny, sleepy, and confused. "Hi, Mia," Raina said, forcing a warmth she did not feel into her voice. "We are playing that secret game, the one I told you about. I need you to win it for me." The sleepy words? "Yes, baby, the sleepy words. I need you to say them for me, loud and clear. Can you do that? Can you say the mantra?" Raina's finger hovered over the audio input command. Zoe's small voice filled her headset, piped directly into the server's audio lock. "The sea is deep, the stars are bright, I am safe, and I am loved. Good night." The waveform on her monitor spiked, a perfect crystalline match. Authentication accepted. Raina slammed the execute button. In the ballroom, every screen, the main LED, the side monitors, the broadcast feeds flashed. Lyle Vesper's gloating face vanished, replaced by the stark, scrolling text of the nocturne ledger, names, dates, offshore accounts, illegal transfers, then the obsidian pin's contents, the buyer's list, federal judges, FDCI directors, senators. The crowd gasped, a collective, horrified intake of breath. Then the world went black. Axiom hit the main breakers. A digitized voice echoed through the total darkness. Emergency blackout protocol engaged. Full systems failure in 90 seconds. Dim red emergency lights cast the cavernous room in an apocalyptic glow. The crowd, realizing the doors were locked, began to panic. On the stage, Cassian stood his ground in the red gloom. The guards were blinded, confused. "It is too late! Lyle!" Cassian's voice boomed, unamplified, cutting through the rising fear. "It is out. I am ending the model. I am ending the facade of philanthropy you hide behind." From the main screen, now black, Lyle's voice returned. "Patch through an emergency system." He was laughing. "You fool. You think that matters. Justice is a media product. By morning, that data will be disinformation. All you have done is sign your own death warrant." In the booth, Raina knew the upload had only hit the room. The external broadcast was dead. "I have to get to the backup generator," she muttered. "I have to get this out." A battery-powered follow spot, operated by a panicked technician, snapped on. Its beam swung wildly, searching the room, and found her, a lone figure high above the crowd on the metal catwalk. She ran. She was a target, illuminated, but she did not care. She sprinted the length of the gantry to the stage-left backup generator, her heavy broadcast rig slamming against her hip. In the power source hallway, Keen Ravel and his small, clean MOTB team met the Axiom security. The lights flickered, casting the fight in strobing flashes of red and white. It was close. Brutal work. Keen slammed an Axiom guard into a breaker box, the resulting electrical arc saving him from a knife. In the main control room, Gia Calaveri, her face a mask of cold fury, confronted Lyle Vesper, who was trying to regain control of the system. "You have failed, Lyle," Gia said. "This is not failure," he snarled, ripping wires from a console. "This is a cleansing. The Calaveri name is a disease. I am the cure." "You mistake noise for power," Gia said, stepping toward him, unafraid. "Power without a moral choice. Lyle is just the most decorated form of fear." Lyle's eyes were wild. He saw Raina on the monitor, plugging her rig into the backup generator. He roared in frustration and slammed his fist on the red fire suppression panel for the stage. "Stage purge CO2, he yelled. "Flood them." Massive vents above the stage hissed open. It was not smoke. It was a frigid white cloud of carbon dioxide, a fire-killing trap designed to displace all oxygen. It poured down, blanketing the stage, obscuring everything. The crowd screamed, surging away, the panic becoming a stampede. Raina got her connection. Signal active. She turned, climbing down the gantry ladder as the cold fog rolled up to meet her. Cassian saw her descending into the cloud. He tore off his tuxedo jacket, climbed the first few rungs to meet her, and threw the heavy wool over her head and shoulders. "Breathe through this," he yelled, grabbing her waist, pulling her down, shielding her as they landed hard on the chaotic stage floor. He hauled her toward a service exit. In the flashing red light, she saw his hand. It was shaking. A deep, uncontrollable tremor. It was not fear. It was the old acoustic trauma from the jet, the shock, the cold, re-triggered by the sudden, pressurized blast of the gas. She stopped. In the middle of the screaming chaos, she grabbed his trembling hand. She did not comfort him. She did not placate him. She took his hand and pressed it flat and hard against her own chest, over her heart, holding it there with both of hers. His fingers were splayed against her ribs, feeling the steady, strong thump, thump, thump of her life. "Listen," she commanded, her voice a fierce, low anchor. "Here. I am right here. This is real." His wild, gray eyes locked onto hers. He felt her heartbeat, solid and true. He closed his eyes for 1 second. The shaking stopped. His fingers curled, gripping her. "The feed," she shouted over the alarms. "It is only local. The world cannot see it. I have to get to the roof, the main harbor broadcast tower. I can patch the rig directly into the antenna." "The roof," he confirmed, his voice solid again. He pulled her toward the exit. They slammed through the door into a concrete stairwell. The digitized voice was relentless. Total building blackout in 30 seconds. They crashed through the heavy rooftop access door, bursting out into a wall of sound and water. The city alarms were deafening, and the rain was back. A sudden, cold, horizontal sheet, just like the night he had been pulled from the bay. 20 seconds, the voice echoed up the stairwell. They sprinted across the wet, dark roof. The Harbor Line Pavilion helipad was a concrete desert lashed by a wind that screamed. It was a solid physical force that shoved and tore at them, trying to peel them from the rooftop. The rain had turned frigid, hitting them in horizontal sheets that stung like needles. "The antenna array," Raina yelled, her voice shredded by the gale. She pointed to a communications mast at the far edge of the roof, blinking a single red light. "The emergency broadcast feed." She ran, hunched low against the wind, the heavy broadcast rig clutched in one hand. She reached the main junction box, her fingers already numb and clumsy as she fumbled with the heavy-duty port. As she jammed the cable in, a sudden, violent gust hit the luxury penthouse level just below the roof. A massive pane of shatterproof glass, already stressed by the blackout, finally gave way. It exploded outward in a shower of glittering, deadly fragments. The glass shrapnel flew straight at her. "Raina," Cassian shouted. He moved without hesitation, throwing his body in front of hers, shielding her with his back. He grunted as the shards, sharp as razors, pelted his tuxedo jacket. He was a solid wall between her and the storm. "Are you in?" he yelled, his voice muffled against her hair. "Almost," she cried, her fingers finally locking the port. The main access door to the roof burst open again, slamming against the concrete wall. Lyle Vesper stood framed in the red emergency light of the stairwell, his face a mask of primal rage. He was not alone. 2 Axiom gunmen fanned out, raising their weapons. "Stop her!" Lyle screamed. The first shot was a flat crack, stolen by the wind. The second was a vicious thwack, a sound of impact that was too close. Cassian cried out, a sharp, choked sound, and stumbled back. "Cassie?" A dark stain bloomed on his side, just above his hip, spreading rapidly over the white of his shirt. He was hit. Raina forgot the antenna, forgot the ledger. She grabbed his arm. "Move!" She dragged him, half carrying him, behind a massive solid steel air conditioning unit. They collapsed onto the wet roof, hidden from the line of fire. "How bad?" she panted, her hands flying over his side. "It is just a graze," he hissed, but his face was chalk white, the blood shockingly bright against his skin. "Do not lie to me. Not now." Her voice was the clipped, cold command of a rescuer. She ripped a long strip of fabric from the hem of her own technical shirt, ignoring the icy rain on her skin. She balled it up and pressed it hard against the wound. "Hold this. Hard pressure." The stairwell door banged open a third time. Keen Ravel staggered out, his cheap suit soaked, his face grim. "MOTB," he yelled, though only the wind heard him. He did not bother with his gun. He lobbed a small, dark cylinder that skittered across the wet helipad. It detonated with a blinding, painful flash of white light and a bang that rattled Raina's teeth. The flashbang. The 2 gunmen cried out, disoriented, clutching their eyes and firing blind into the storm. Lyle, however, had seen where Cassian and Raina had fallen. He charged, ignoring his own men. He had lost his pistol in the stairwell. In his hand, he held a thin, elegant knife like a stiletto, its blade gleaming. He lunged toward the HVAC unit, his eyes fixed on Cassian. "End of the line, brother!" Cassian was on one knee, his side wounded, trying to raise his own weapon. He was too slow. Raina moved. She was not a fighter. She was a rescuer. She understood leverage, balance, and the chaotic weight of a panicking body. She did not try to block the knife. She stepped into the attack. As Lyle lunged, she hooked her arm under his charging arm, pivoted on her heel, and dropped her center of gravity. It was a perfect rolling hip throw, a technique to control a much larger victim in rough seas. Lyle, propelled by his own killing rage, was utterly unprepared. His momentum betrayed him. He flew over her hip and crashed, back first, onto the concrete with a sickening crack. The knife skittered away into the darkness. Cassian was on him in an instant, his knee pinning Lyle's chest. He had the fallen knife in his hand, its point pressed hard against Lyle's throat. The rage in Cassian's face was terrifying, a pure, cold Calaveri expression. In that moment, he was his father's son. "Do it," Lyle spat, a bloody grin splitting his face. "Show them who you really are." Raina, holding her broadcast rig, aimed its small, forward-facing camera directly at them. The feed was live, even if only to the local system. Cassian saw the red recording light. He saw Raina, her face fierce and steady, her eyes locked on him. He looked at the knife, then at Lyle, his chest heaving. He let out a long, shuddering breath and threw the knife aside. No. He grabbed Lyle's wrists, binding them with a heavy-duty zip tie from Raina's own utility belt. Then he looked straight into the camera lens, his voice rough and breathless. "My name is Cassian Calaveri. I am done. I refuse violence as the language of my business. All of this. It ends now." "Raina the feed," Keen Ravel's voice shouted. He and Gia had emerged, Gia clutching the wall, and had made it to the antenna. Gia's rerouted the main power. The emergency broadcast is live. It's going out to the city. But the file? It is corrupted. It's locked. It needs a final authorization key. Raina sprinted to the terminal, her rig in hand. The screen was flashing, "Final decryption required." This was it. She ripped the heavy, black obsidian pin from her pocket. With a savage twist, she snapped the decorative top, revealing the tiny, glittering nano card hidden within. She jammed it into the console's decoder. The screen flashed green. Authorization accepted. Decrypting. Streaming. The feed was live. It was not just the ledger. It was everything. The Axiom Cabal's internal charter, the buyer's list, the bank accounts, the dates, the orders to the FDCI to sabotage the jet, the specific instructions to manipulate port policies. It was all streaming, live, to every television and phone in the city. "You fool!" Lyle screamed, struggling against the tie. "You have burned yourself. You are burning your mother. You are torching your own house. You idiot!" Cassian staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding side. "You have to burn the old rot," he panted, looking at the city lights below. "So something new can breathe." As if his words were the cue, the city, which had dimmed and flickered during the blackout, suddenly roared back to life. The power grid stabilized, and with the lights came a new sound, rising from the streets below, a sound that grew louder than the wind and the rain. Sirens, dozens of them. Floodlights from the ground suddenly illuminated the entire roof, catching them in a harsh, white glare. Below, the plaza was swarming with vehicles, not just MOTB. They were marked units from the Harborline Inter-District Prosecutor's Office. Keen Ravel's call had worked. The real cavalry was here. "It is over," Keen breathed, sagging against the mast. But Lyle was laughing again, a high-pitched, manic sound that cut through the wail of the sirens. Not yet. From the dark, rainy void beyond the helipad, a black, unmarked helicopter ascended. It had no lights, a ghost of military-grade hardware. It hovered, its rotor wash a hurricane that threatened to rip them all from the roof. In one fluid, violent motion, Lyle snapped his bound wrists against a sharp metal edge of the HVAC unit. The plastic tie gave way. He was free. Before Cassian or Keen could react, Lyle sprinted at... He launched himself off the edge of the helipad, a desperate 10-foot leap into the open. waiting door of the helicopter. The blades bit the air, the craft banked hard, a dark shape against the storm, and vanished back into the driving rain. The ghost helicopter rocketed upward, a black wound against the storm clouds. Lyle was inside, vanishing. Raina, standing near the helipad's structural mast, saw the coiled length of a heavy-duty emergency mooring line. It was a desperate, insane impulse. She grabbed the weighted grappling hook, swung it once, and launched it upward with all the force of her body. The hook flew true, a perfect, desperate arc, and snagged the helicopter's rear landing skid with a violent, metallic clang. The rope snapped taut, yanking the helicopter and pulling Raina off her feet. She screamed as she was dragged across the wet concrete, sliding, hydroplaning toward the open, dark edge of the roof. She felt her boots leave the building. "No!" Cassian roared. He lunged, ignoring the fire in his side, and tackled her waist. His arms clamped around her like a steel vice. Their combined weight and the lurch of the helicopter sent them crashing down onto the helipad, skidding, stopping mere inches from the 50-story drop. He was on top of her, his face buried in her neck, a human shield. They lay there, tangled, gasping, refusing to let go. "He is too low. He is dragging," Keen Ravel yelled. The helicopter was fighting the sudden, unexpected anchor, its engine screaming. Ravel dropped to one knee, a classic shooter's stance, and raised his pistol. He fired twice, not at the cockpit, but at the tail rotor. A high, sickening shriek of metal tearing metal cut through the wind. The tail rotor, crippled, seized. The helicopter swung wildly, a wounded beast, its balance gone. It spun, dropping fast, disappearing into the darkness toward the container yard far below. The symphony of sirens instantly converged on its location. The fight was over. The feed from Raina's dropped camera, still active, pointed up at the sky, broadcasting the audio of their ragged breathing. In the gala ballroom, the dazed audience, now unlocked, was streaming onto the plaza. They looked at their phones, the live stream still playing. They saw the ledger. They saw the buyer's list. They understood. They had not been guests. They had been witnesses. Across the city, discreet summons were already being issued to the men and women on that list. Gia Calaveri, her face pale but her spine rigid, walked back into the camera's frame, supported by Keen. She looked directly into the lens. "To the people of San Lazaro," she said, her voice clear and amplified by the emergency broadcast. "I apologize. My family allowed this sickness to grow in the shadows. Blackshore, as you knew it, is finished." She took a pained breath. "Effective immediately, I am relinquishing all operational control. All assets identified in the Nocturne ledger will be seized and transferred. They will seed a new public trust, the Zoe Care Community Health Fund." Raina, hearing her daughter's name, stared in disbelief. Cassian, his hand clamped to the dark, spreading stain on his side, used the mask to pull himself to his feet. He faced the camera, the blood stark against his ruined shirt. "My name is Cassian Calaveri," he panted, his voice raw. "I am responsible. I was too slow to stop this game. I was complicit in my silence." He met the lens, his eyes burning. "No more. From this night, I choose transparency." Raina moved to him, her legs unsteady. She ignored the cameras, the wind, the pain. She reached up, her hands grimy from the roof and smeared with his blood, and framed his face. "And I," she whispered, her voice just loud enough for the microphone to catch, "I choose you. When you choose what is right." He leaned down, and she rose up. They kissed. It was not the desperate, passionate kiss of the safe house. It was public. It was exhausted. It was a promise. Sealed in rain and sirens, a vow of survival. Below, the first wave of clean MOTB units, led by the Harbor Line Prosecutor's Office, was already inside, placing handcuffs on the stunned FDCI officials who were on the guest list. Keen Ravel, his badge gleaming, announced the formation of the Harbor Line Task Force, an independent investigation that would tear the rot out, root and stem. In her pocket, Raina's phone buzzed, a single new voice message. She played it, pressing the phone to her ear. It was Zoe, her voice small but clear, watching the live feed from the safety of the Hummingbird station. "Mommy, I saw the lights. I heard your heart so loud. Mommy, I love you." The adrenaline, the fear, the impossible strength that had held her up, it all broke. Raina sagged against Cassian, her face pressed to his chest, her shoulders shaking as silent, hot tears of pure, unadulterated relief streamed down her cheeks. He held her, his one good arm locking her to his side as the first team of tactical medics swarmed the roof. They loaded Cassian onto a stretcher. He never let go of her hand. Raina walked beside him, their fingers laced, as they descended through the chaos, past the stunned, pale faces of the city's ruined elite. At the ambulance, Gia Calaveri waited, her arm in its silk sling. She did not look at her son. She looked at Raina. She placed her free hand on Raina's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "Home," Gia said, her voice thick with an emotion Raina had never heard. "It is not a place. Home is where you brought my son back to himself." 1 year later, the rain falling on San Lazaro Bay was a soft, gentle mist. The Zoe Care Community Clinic of Echo Heights was open, its doors a bright, welcoming blue. It offered the best pediatric asthma care in the state, entirely free of charge. Down at the newly refurbished public docks, Cassian Calaveri, now the managing director of the non-profit Harbor Line Trust, was teaching a group of laughing local kids how to rig small sailboats. He wore jeans and a simple Henley, the tension that had once defined him gone from his shoulders. Nearby, Raina, the lead instructor for the Harbor Watch Civilian Rescue Program, was guiding a class of new parents through free water safety drills. That evening, as the fog rolled in, they walked. Hand in hand, they strolled down the old wooden planks of Pier 4, the exact spot where their worlds had collided. Zoe, now 7, her lungs clear and strong, ran ahead, her purple dolphin kite soaring on the steady ocean breeze. They stopped at the end of the pier. Cassian pulled a small object from his pocket, the black obsidian hairpin. The data card inside was long gone, a central piece of evidence in a federal vault. He placed the simple, dark pin inside a small glass memorial case dedicated to the port's renewal. Raina leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. The air smelled only of salt, clean water, and the future. "No more black cars," she murmured. "No more black cars," he agreed. He kissed her, slow and deep, anchored by the sound of the waves and the distant, happy shouts of their daughter. They were no longer two worlds at war. They were simply and finally home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.